Well, an extraordinary man is with us today, indeed. Ray Fowler, Raymond E. Fowler. He is the author of 10 books and many articles on the paranormal phenomena. Most notably, he has spent many years examining the life and experiences of Betty Andreasson Luca, Betty Andreasson, the Andreasson Affair, truly one of the great documents of the paranormal and the edge in human history. He's got a new book now that's a departure called Synchrophile, Amazing Personal Encounters with Synchronicity and Other Strange Phenomena. And Ray, I want to talk a lot about all of your remarkable life experience, including what's going on with Betty, etc., and so forth. But before we even get into any of that, the preface of your book blew me away. The September 11th stuff went farther than anything I had ever read about those numbers. And why don't we just go through that real quickly together, if you will?
The winning number was 9/11. Now, is this a highly improbable coincidence, or is it debatable? Now, we have these statisticians who would quickly remind us that the probability that 9/11 would be the winning number upon that date is 1 in 1,000. Thus, they would say the probability is not that high. Well, as some would argue, the lottery number is just one half of the equation. This coincidence did not happen on just any date. It coincided with a highly known and emotional event, and it was the date of the greatest attack ever made upon the United States. In addition, it would be pointed out that there were other coincidences regarding the number of 1/1 in its now potential state. September 11th, for example, is written 9-11, 911, the telephone number for emergencies. And the sum of the digits in 911 are 9 plus 1 plus 1, which equals 11. One might also note that September 11th is the 254th day of the year, and the sum of 2 plus 5 plus 4 equals 11. After September 11th, there are 111 days left in the year. And one might even note that the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center look like the number 11. New York was the 11th state added to the Union, and New York City has 11 letters. And interestingly enough, the flight number of the first plane to hit the towers was, you guessed it, Flight 11. And Flight 11 had 92 people aboard. Now, plus 2 equals 11.
Well, let me ask you this. What is this all about? What does this mean? That it's so weird. It implies that there's something about the universe that we really are missing here, doesn't it?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. Most people have these remarkable coincidences, but they only happen once in a while. And for some reason or other, my life is just full of these coincidences. And they usually happen in greater numbers when I'm working on a book on paranormal phenomena, UFOs, whatever, or when I'm investigating the subject. And they really started in great earnest when I began the Andreasson Affair investigation. It was like I was bumping up against another reality, and maybe through osmosis or something, these experiences began to happen in not only great numbers, but in great detail.
Why don't you tell us how you happened to meet Betty Andreasson?
Well, Betty wrote a letter to Dr. Hynek. And
Dr. Alan Hynek, the great, really one of the great pioneers of the UFO community, if there ever was one.
Yeah, and he was the chief scientific consultant to several UFO projects. And in the letter, she briefly described an experience where these entities entered the house, and she had communication with them, and really she wanted some help understanding what was going on here. She only remembered a fraction of the experience that later would come out under hypnosis. So Dr. Hynek at that time knew that we were interested in Massachusetts in giving a UFO abduction report, the FBI treatment, as it were. So he sent me the letter. And I put together a team of investigators, and we spent a number of months on the Andreessen affair. We thought that it would just be about one experience that she had in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts. But as we continued to dig into the event through hypnosis, we found out that her experiences, as many abductees do, she had an experience that started at age 5 or 6 years old, and we began to trace the experiences that she had from childhood to teenagehood and through her adult life. And it was a fantastic. I think I spent almost 20 years just investigating her family and her family's family, and it would seem that her mother and dad and her husband's mother and dad also had these experiences as well. And again, this is sort of a benchmark of the UFO abduction experience. There seems to be a family situation from one generation to another for some unknown reason, although we can speculate upon those reasons.
Well, yeah. Why don't we speculate a little bit? You were close to this for years and wrote a great deal about it. And what have you come up with?
Well, I've come up with some rather strange ideas.
Good. That's what we're here for.
I think that the UFO abduction phenomena, for example, and the so-called cattle mutilation phenomenon, you could liken UFO abductions to humans maintaining cattle. I think we, human beings, not only human beings, but probably all life forms on Earth, are their property. And the UFO abductions, we might equate them with medical exams, maintaining health, breeding, and not particularly for this life, but for another life from where these objects come from. The near-death experience, I think, will be a new birth into another world, and I think that these entities, UFOs, which most people interpret as extraterrestrial, they truly are extraterrestrial, but I think they're paraphysical, that they come from the same place that we go, a parallel universe that coexists with ours. And the only experience that we have on record as far as humans go is the out-of-the-body experience and the near-death experience, where millions of people report leaving their body, going down a dark tunnel into another realm. But this is usually ignored by ufologists. They don't see any connection with this. And yet, Dr. Kenneth Ring, I would call him the father of NDE research, has cases in his files of near-death experiences that are identical to the UFO abduction experience, except the person or persons are taken from their body and experience the same type of thing that UFO abductees experience in the physical body. And vice versa. You take Betty Andreessen, for example. On a number of occasions, Betty and her husband, Bob Luca, were not taken physically as abductees, but they left their bodies behind, and yet they experienced the same type of experience that UFO abductees experience in their physical bodies. So I think there's a commonality between near-death experiences, after-death communication, UFO abductions, out-of-the-body experiences, and even synchronicity and poltergeist phenomena, ESP, all of these things, I believe, come from a common source. And that common source is at least one or many coexisting, I guess you would call them dimensions, that coexist with us, but under normal circumstances we can't detect them. We are limited to linear time. We're limited to the present. If you look at reality, an analogy would be a phonograph record. And the phonograph record's grooves are the past, and the grooves in front of the needle resting on the phonograph needle would be the future. But where that needle touches is all that we experience. But reality as a whole is that whole phonograph record. Now, once in a while, we, or the essence, our soul, whatever you want to call it, might have a precognitive, a human might have a precognitive experience. It might be caused by an impending traumatic experience like death. And our essence is able to go ahead on those grooves, as it were, and come back and report to that person that he or she is going to die, and that person has a premonition of death. Then you have people who, again, somehow bump into this other reality and have an interface with it, who actually can see the past happening as it were happening in the present, or see the future as it were happening in the present. And this would indicate that the past, present, and future are all the same. But we, on this plane of existence, again, are limited to just now, N-O-W, now, the present, and linear time. We cannot experience everything at the same time. The only time that ever would happen in a person's life is during the near-death experience, where in just a small fraction of time, a person has a life review where they see everything at once, and sometimes even actually see some of the future events. So when they come back to the body, sent back to the body, they know it's going to happen in the future. Now, not only do other people have these experiences, but I have seen the past and the present, and I've seen the future and the present. And so it has my dad and many other people that you read about in other reports.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a little break. When we get back, I'm going to just challenge Ray. What is the most incredible coincidence he can remember having? And I think you're going to be really surprised, because this is a guy who knows something about whereof he speaks. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. Synchro-file. A compendium of stories from a life lived in synchronicity by famed UFO researcher Ray Fowler. Is it because he researched the Andreasen incident? Is it because he had UFO experiences as a kid? Why did he live this life in synchronicity? One story after another of the synchronicities that have run the life and ruled the life of Ray Fowler. A fascinating and unusual book. You won't find anything quite like it anywhere else. Synchrophile by Ray Fowler. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Synchrophile. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back talking to Ray Fowler about synchrophile. And you know, Ray, I have to tell you, some of the most stunning coincidences I have ever encountered, in this fascinating file from your life. I mean, we're finding out maybe a little bit about what you know about why you're like this, but in all of us have synchronicities, of course. But why don't you, I want you to grab one of the synchronicities that really blows you away, and just we're going to sit back and listen. Just tell us the story.
Well, I can tell you about an amazing coincidence that happened involving my wife's mother. I married my wife Margaret in England, and to make a long story short, she used to visit her mother every few years, but her mother was getting elderly. She was about 100 years old and had to move into a nursing home. Margaret was very concerned that moving out of the neighborhood that she wouldn't have friends to look after her, and her brother lived very far away from the mother. But her mother put the house up for sale, and the first two people that bid on the house got the house. Margaret went over to visit her mother in the nursing home and decided that she would visit her mother's former house to meet the new people. She was invited in for tea, and they were discussing things, and they asked where Margaret was from. And Margaret said, was it just a tiny town in Massachusetts called Wenham? And the woman looked at her and said, I've been to Wenham. And Margaret said, where in Wenham? She was really surprised. She said, 16 Friend Court. And Margaret almost dropped her tea. We lived at that time on 13 Friend Court, right across the street. Evelyn Yeaton's house, a good friend of ours. So you can see that this is just one example of the strange things that have happened to the family.
It gets back, though, to what you were talking about before the break, and that is that we are actually living in a kind of a time stream that's linked in some way to another reality that is in which all time is present all the time. And would it not be possible that the closer we are to the barrier almost between those two realities, the more synchronistic our life would become? Or am I just talking through my hat?
I think some people probably have more psychic abilities than others. It's a natural thing. Some people are able to develop it, and when they do, they're more in tune with this other universe. Carl Jung's collective unconsciousness might be the same type of thing, because people who have near-death experiences experience absolute knowledge. They can't remember when they come back, but when they have this experience, they know everything. And it seems that when you're in that out-of-the-body essence and enter that particular realm, there is no time. Bob Luca, for example, I remember when he and Betty were taken from their home in Connecticut into a large craft, and were observing their daughters being operated on, said that there's no time here. This is different. They have a sense of a complete different appreciation of what time is. It's no longer linear. Everything is now. It's something that we can't comprehend, and we don't like to comprehend it, because if we can see the future through precognitive dreams, or because our essence travels ahead in time and reports back to us, very rarely happens, but it happens to some people, it would almost seem that our future might be predetermined. And no one likes to feel that we don't have any free will. My take on this is that when the Big Bang occurred, that at least at the subatomic level, everything happened at once, past, present, and future, and that would include our making decisions, but in our free will. But we only can see one little tiny piece at a time, and on that needle on the phonograph record, we aren't aware of everything else, but it's there. It's there. My father, for example, was driving in Maine, taking a shortcut to Ellsworth, Maine. Beautiful day, sunny day, no clouds in the sky. Weather report said beautiful day. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was a tremendous thunderstorm, winds howling, rain and sleet coming, hail coming down. And he saw this old-fashioned car coming toward him and just missing him, with people looking out the windows, panicking. And then in a split second, sunshine again, blue sky, no rain in the car, no rain on the road. He told my uncle about this, and he said that a few people have reported that before, and that a terrible accident had happened there at one time. So Dad actually was seeing something that was still going on, but probably still going on as whirling wave particles at the subatomic level that actually interfaced with his mind, and he actually saw it happening as it were happening now. like you throw a rock in the pond and you see all these ripples going on. Well, these ripples of our past, present, and future are there, and they can be reconstructed in our minds depending upon where we are and how much in tune we are with them. And for some reason or other, he was in tune at that time. My niece had a similar, Margaret's niece had a similar experience. There's an old couple that lived on the road, and he had a nice car, but he couldn't drive it very far. He'd polish it up, and he'd drive it up and down the road once a week. And then they both died, and she was out working in the garden. She heard a familiar sound of a car starting up, which she had heard many times before, across the street. And she looked over the fence, and there was a guy coming down the road in his car. She dropped everything, screamed, went in the house, called her husband to come out. They came out, of course, there was nothing there. But again, she was seeing the past happening in the present.
You know, Ray, I've had a number of experiences like this, including one in March of 1983, where I seemed to go back into the past on a street corner in New York. It was I've described on this radio program a couple times before, and I wrote about it, I believe, in one of my books, probably Breakthrough. And it was before my close encounter experiences, and what happened was I was just getting ready to cross the street at the corner of Houston Street and LaGuardia Place in Manhattan, and suddenly I found myself sort of slipping back into perhaps a period of 100 years before, and it was the most extraordinary experience. I felt vividly, even the smell of the air changed. It started with a sound of something creaking and a smell of pickles, and it turned out that a huge wagon full of barrels of pickles was turning the corner. It was just an absolutely amazing experience, and it brought with it, I almost reached down into the gutter because there was a piece of paper that looked like newspaper there, and I thought, if I grab this, I'll know what's going on here. Am I really in the past? Because that's how I felt. And as I moved, I felt this almost like psychotic-inducing loneliness. It was so intense. And I just froze because I thought, if you touch that paper, you're never going back. And I want to ask you, is that the kind of thing you're talking about, or are we talking about something else to do with time? Are we talking about a world in which time is just different? What exactly is your explanation for this kind of thing?
Well, I think that somehow or other, your essence, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, I call it essence, for some reason left your body and went back to that particular time, and then reported it back to your conscious mind and filtered up to your conscious mind. You saw it. The same thing with people. A friend of mine had precognitive feelings about death and took out all kinds of life insurance policies, and although he was fully insured by GTE, and the day before he went on a business trip, he was scared to go, and to make a long story short, he got killed. And his wife told me that the night before he went on the business trip, he took all his insurance policies and put them on the bureau and went over them, and his last words were to her the following morning when he left that she was going to be a rich widow. And again, I think what happened is because of the trauma of what happened, he was carrying a lithium battery and it blew up, that his essence, again, I think our essence, even not just in sleep, but during the daytime, wanders and just went ahead one day and experienced that and came back to him. And he didn't see his death, but he felt the premonition of death because of that. And again, he sensed that this was going to happen at a future event that he experienced as now, really. I call a lot of these counter coincidences in the book where two events that should naturally coincide don't.
Well, this is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be coming right back in just a moment with Ray Fowler, the author of Synchrophile and one of the great UFO investigators of this era. Synchrophile. a compendium of stories from a life lived in synchronicity by famed UFO researcher Ray Fowler. Is it because he researched the Andreasen incident? Is it because he had UFO experiences as a kid? Why did he live this life in synchronicity? One story after another of the synchronicities that have run the life and ruled the life of Ray Fowler. A fascinating and unusual book. You won't find anything quite like it anywhere else. Synchrophile by Ray Fowler. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Synchrophile. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back. Before we left the air, we were talking to Ray Fowler, the author of Synchrophile. And Ray, before we left the air, you were telling a story of a businessman who seemed to understand and know he was about to die. And then he did die in a strange way involving a lithium battery. And I have to ask you, really, what did happen to the poor guy? It's an odd way to die.
Yes, he was an administrator, and he was on a business trip. But he was a nice guy, and he went down into the laboratory where we were testing a lithium battery that we were going to be using for the Minuteman missile to back up the Minuteman missile. We were using acid batteries at the time. And they needed some help in carrying it. And he was there, and he wasn't supposed to touch it. He wasn't even supposed to be involved in that part of the program. But being a good guy, he was carrying the battery, and a short took place inside the battery. And it blew up and killed him. Injured the other person, but killed Al Ploss, his name was. Terrible thing, and interestingly enough, he had given me a letter the night before, and he told me, give this to my wife if something happens to me. And what it was some of the problems, dangerous problems they were having at that particular time. And she used that to help, actually she sued, I guess, GTE at the time, and that letter was very helpful to her. But so he knew. He also told me during our walks at noon that his father had died young, and he was talking about death. And I usually didn't talk about near-death experiences, but I went through the whole near-death experience with him, told him what to expect and everything when he did die. And I think that may have been a help to him because, it was something very sudden that happened. It wasn't something like he died of cancer slowly and so forth, but it was a very traumatic effect. I know my father, when he had his out-of-the-body experiences, was used to help during the war, he went overseas in this OBE state with other beings. He called them light beings. And at the temporary morgues that they were setting up, the people, the servicemen that were killed, weren't sure what to do, what had happened. Some of them didn't know they had died, and they were using help. Dad was actually helping them show the way to the light, and it was these.
When you say they didn't, what sort of experience was it with people that didn't know they had died?
Well, they come out of their body, and I mean, people look back and see their body lying there, and they say, "Well, where am I?" It must be at first, without any help from someone, a very traumatic experience. And
yeah, I would say so.
With a near-death experience, usually they're transported to a dark place or a tunnel and travel toward a light, and usually sometimes go through a life review. But the people that come back, told to come back, are given a choice. My cousin Betty was given a choice. She died during childbirth and went through the tunnel and actually went through the light and actually into a city, a beautiful city. And this light being that was with her told her that she had to go back, and she didn't want to go back. It was just too wonderful. And this is typical of NDEers. And they reminded her that she had a new baby in her husband, and then she felt that she should go back. But these are I call these strange things counter coincidences, because looking at it from our aspect of reality, these things don't happen. these counter coincidences, and I mentioned quite a few of them. These are the most fascinating type of coincidences in my book. I'll go over a few if you'd like.
Yeah, please, let's do.
Yeah, well, had a dog named Daxel, and we kept him down cellar. And in the wintertime, it was very cold down there. So, very, very cold night, I went down, and he was right beside a heater, which was beside the stairs, electric heater. And he's on a rug, and I put a blanket over him, turned the heater on, and left him for the night. I went down there the next morning. He had gotten up during the night, and the blanket that I had put on him was draped over the heater. The heater was cold, and it was unplugged. It was like something or someone unplugged that heater, because if they hadn't, that blanket would have caught fire, especially near the stairs, and would have caught the whole house afire. My wife went into the shed to get something. Up above her, there's a heavy step ladder that opens up like an A. She bumped it, and it started to fall on her. She covered her head with her hands, waiting for it to hit her. Nothing happened. She looked around, and the step ladder was in the middle of the shed, all set up. Now, these things are counter coincidences. These are two events that should naturally coincide but don't. She should have got hit on the head with that ladder, and that blanket should have caught a fire.
Now, does this mean that there is some kind of something out there, like a guardian angel, maybe helping us? Or
well, again, I think it's from this other essence, or other dimension, or whether it's a guardian angel or whether it's family relatives. Recently, I have a slight case of, I guess they call it apnea, where you stop breathing at night. And not too long ago, I was sound asleep, dreaming, and I felt someone grasp my left arm and yanked it so hard that I sat right up in bed. And I looked up, and I saw not the whole body of my mother, but half of it glowing. And she used my nickname. She said, "Buster, you stopped breathing." I think that there was something said after that, but I couldn't remember. Then she faded, and I just sort of looked around and wondered, what on earth, is this real? And, went back to sleep again. So it could very well be. But again, I think it comes from this common source, this other reality. And of course, if that was really my mother, she would have come from this other reality.
Yes. And Ray, have you ever had, what do you think about your own future?
What do I think about my own?
Yeah. I mean, do you've been in the presence of all of this synchronicity? You have friends who have anticipated their own deaths. How about you?
I really don't know. I think this has been an education for me, because I've had all of these different experiences, and I'm trying to put them all together. And if someone told me that I would be interested in things like this and so forth way back when I first started to investigate UFOs, I would have thought they were crazy, because I was strictly what ufologists call a nuts and bolts person, that UFOs are physical craft from another solar system, which they may very well be, but they are not physical in the sense that we call physical. They're paraphysical. I mean, you can have a radar visual sighting, and you can have a UFO at point A, and instead of traveling along a path from A to B, it just disappears, just pops into something else and appears at point B. Where did it go? Well, it went again into this other reality, and it's recorded on radar. It's recorded with the eye. You take UFO entities. Abductees report balls of light coming through a window and hovering beside the bed, and this ball of light expands, and there's a physical entity. Or Betty Andreasson, for example, when she's taken from her house, somehow or other, there's a molecular displacement of the door. They put her in line, and they walk right through the door. And again, they took her a number of times in an OBE way rather than physically.
Ray, we're getting up on another break right now. Why don't we just stop and take it, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. When we come back, what got Ray? Was his intelligence work somehow involved in his getting into his interest in UFOs, or will he tell us? We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back. Ray, I was wanting to ask you before we left the air about your beginnings in ufology, and you worked in some very sensitive areas during the war and after the war. Do you think that any of this has any bearing on your interest in UFOs, or where does it come from?
Well, I think there are two reasons. I saw a UFO in 1947. And, of course, in 1947, the newspapers were full of these sightings. And although I don't discuss my UFO abduction experiences very often, and at that time of my life, I didn't realize that my childhood experiences were UFO-related, I think my subconscious mind remembered all of the different things that happened to me as a child and the abductions. So when the UFOs, or flying discs as we called them in those days, appeared, I had tremendous interest in them and actually saw a disc-shaped object when I was working on a farm. And when other things happened, like a missing time experience and so forth, I didn't equate this with UFOs because no one talked about missing time and so forth. It really wasn't until I investigated the Andreasen affair and her childhood encounters that I realized what had happened to me, and it sort of came back all at once. But as a teen, interested in UFOs, I collected all the newspaper articles, read Donald Kehoe's books, and so forth. And when I went into the service, I came across people, a photographer at Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, who was developing gun camera photographs of UFOs. At least he would tell me that. He wouldn't tell me much more about them. And came across other Air Force personnel who had experiences. I thought to myself, when I get out of the Air Force and when I get through college, I'm going to get into UFO investigation. And I started in 1963 and began sending unsolicited reports to the Air Force and to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And basically later became their lead investigator, head of the subcommittee for Massachusetts for NICAP, and then director of investigations from the Mutual UFO Network, and also for the Colorado University. I was an early morning coordinator for them. It's sort of an evolution, but it really, I think that the interest of seeing one and my subconscious remembering all the different things that happened as a child instigated the interest in UFOs and such an overwhelming interest in space travel and astronomy that I built an observatory and a planetarium in 1970 and ran that for about 30 years. I became a fanatic in astronomy and in UFOs. I guess you'd call it a fanatic.
Yeah. What was the sighting in 1947?
I was working on a farm for 20 cents an hour. And it was, I think, was the 4th, as far as I can remember, it was the 4th of July, and I have a newspaper which I think helps remember that. We had these long, long rows, and the farmer would place a jug of water at the end of these rows, hoping that we would do our work fast. And I was thirsty that day, so I was ahead of all my friends. And as I was going along, something caught a flicker of light, sort of caught my eye, and I looked up, and I saw a reflection off of what looked like, in the distance, a parachute. And I thought to myself, someone must have jumped out of a plane in a parachute. So I'm looking at this thing, and it's getting closer and closer, and I see there's no shroud lines. And I yell to my friends way, way back, and they aren't paying any attention. And I'm looking at this thing, and it comes parallel to me, and then begins to drop in a falling leaf motion behind trees. And I didn't even equate that as a UFO at that time, even though I was interested in UFOs. I thought it must have been a parachute, but there was no shroud lines. It was a disc-shaped object. But that was Saturday. In the Monday Salem Evening News banner headlines reported flying discs in that area.
And what was the area?
Salem, Massachusetts. Well, where I saw it was Danvers, Massachusetts.
Well, what's so interesting is, of course, that was within days of the Roswell incident.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Isn't that something? So you were really in, you were really in on the beginning of this thing.
I'm wondering if I saw that for a particular reason. It
exactly
really instigated the whole thing. Plus, I think the subconscious knowledge of these things that happened before that I didn't remember at that time except as vivid dreams, and even then I didn't equate them with UFOs. We didn't know anything about UFO abductions at that time, missing time and so forth. So it's been a very slow evolution from the time of a teen until now.
Until now, and yet you're still involved in this, and in such an interesting way, because I think that you're somehow coming very close to this barrier between this world and the other world, a membrane almost that you're pressing against. That's my sense of.
Well, things happen at night, Whitley, and I'm not really sure. I mean, other than the abduction phenomenon, it seems that I have what I think are OBEs. I mean, I feel myself rising out of bed. What usually happens is I'll get this tingling, electrifying feeling, like something is going to happen at first, and then my body, I feel this tingling, and then it will start vibrating so much that you feel like your whole body is shaking. And then you wake up, and a voice will say, "Look at the clock, Ray," or a buzzing sound will wake you up, and you look at the clock and you see the clock numbers lined up, 111 or 222 or 333 or 444 or 555. It's almost like this clock phenomenon, which I've discussed with other abductees who are experiencing it, is very similar to a cue that a hypnotist would use. For example, when Dr. Edelstein was using hypnosis on Betty Andreasson, after a few sessions, he could do something with his hand, just a little gesture, and she would just look like a limp doll. She would go right under hypnosis. And I think when I wake up, and other abductees wake up and look at the clock, there's a post-hypnotic suggestion saying, when you see the clock, 111 or 222, you're going to forget everything. The problem is you don't forget everything, and what I usually do is, write down what happens, although it slips away very fast. You've got to do your best to remember what happened. In fact, when I read my own journal or diary now, I don't remember most of the things that have happened. It was like I'm reading about someone else. They erase it almost permanently, and even under hypnosis, sometimes it's hard to get through these mental blocks that they place there, although they sometimes tell abductees that you will remember when the time is right. And this is what they did, of course, with Betty Andreasson.
Ray Fowler, I would like to thank you for having been with us. This has been quite an extraordinary experience. Ray Fowler's new book, Synchrophile, available from the unknowncountry.com store. Do not miss it, Synchrophile. Learn about that membrane right at the edge of the barrier between the worlds. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe. We've come to a critical moment, you and I, in our journey through dreamland. So get ready to have your mind blown wide open, not by incredible claims, not by brilliant speculation, but by hard, solid science. You're about to hear from Linda Moulton Howe, Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker and the editor of the most incredible science website in the world, earthfiles.com. Go there every day. Learn the truth about science that ordinary media dares not tell you. Today, Linda has an extraordinary report for us. Cattle mutilations are back big time. It has been years since Linda has seen things like this. This is going to chill your blood. Here she is from Philadelphia, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. That's right. I've been back out in the Midwest where animal mutilations appear to be occurring again. And it was only Tuesday night, August 17th, 2004. Something unidentified flew low and loud over the small farming community of Farnham, Nebraska, southeast of North Platte, and actually not very far from all of the central action in northeastern Colorado that I covered so extensively back in 1979 and the early 1980s. At least a dozen people heard a very loud noise on that night of Tuesday, August 17th, and then 2 days later, on Thursday, August 19th, in the early evening, rancher Larry Jurgens was out checking his head of about 100 cattle. Mr. Jurgens and his wife Joanne have lived in Farnham on the same property for 35 years. One of their healthiest cows, an 11-year-old Black Angus, had given birth some time back to a very healthy calf that had already grown to weigh about 400 pounds. So all was well with his herd until the night of August 19th, when neither of the Jurgens had ever seen what Larry found after sunset: their Angus cow dead and mutilated.
And I come down this canyon and I seen this dead cow, and I got to looking farther and I looked at her eyeball and her eyeball was gone. And then I looked around at her bag and it was totally sliced off. And I started home and I got to thinking about her tongue, and I went back and it was also severed clear back in her mouth. There wasn't anything left of it.
What did these excisions or cuts look like to your eye?
Well, it's just a clean cut. The tongue, I butchered a lot of cows, and I know the tongue is hard to get out, especially with their mouth. They're without cutting their mouth open, and I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Was it cut in a vertical cut deep within the throat?
It was back as far as I could see. Her mouth was closed, so I pried her mouth open to see if it was still there, and it was gone. And this was getting about dark, so it was getting hard to see.
And was there any blood anywhere around any of these cuts?
There was no blood whatsoever, no place on this cow. You didn't see any blood that had drained. Usually a dead cow will have blood around her, and there's no blood whatsoever. Even on the back end, I never said that, was all open, but the buzzards had ate her. It was 2 days, and the buzzards had ate her a little bit on the back, but no cuts or nothing that touched any place else.
Mm-hmm. And the whole udder was removed. Was it a circular cut or an oval cut?
It was a round hole on her back part.
And did it penetrate through the muscles, or was it a clean cut down to that white tissue that's over the muscles?
It was a clean cut down to her stomach. You could see her stomach inside, and it wasn't severed at all. It was all intact.
Okay, so you could see into the body cavity.
Yes, when I picked her legs up.
And when did you turn her over to see if the other eye was there?
I did 2 days later. I think it was Saturday. I went down and pulled her over. I wanted to see if there were any hole like she'd been shot. And the other eye was still in her head. Presuming that she was laying on her left side, they didn't pick her head up to take it out.
Okay. And
there was 2 little holes right where her heart is. I never cut them open, but they were about the size of a bullet hole, and they were just about an inch apart.
About a quarter inch wide and in diameter, and about an inch apart. Based on work that I've done with veterinarian pathologists in the past, there's a distinct possibility that the heart was removed, leaving the pericardium intact. We've had several cases. it's not possible physically, but it's happened. And sometimes these tiny holes are in these cases where the heart tissue has been removed. We don't know how that's done. Did you look around the ground to see if there were any unusual tracks either that night or later?
Yes, I did. The cows, the other cattle had mellowed around her, and there was a lot of manure, like maybe she had bellered some and called the other cattle in. You know, I don't know what caused all that. I've never seen the cattle around a dead cow like that, like they were around her. And there were no car tracks there, and I couldn't see any other tracks that I could see. It's dry in this country, and it's hard to see tracks.
Mm-hmm. Did you call the sheriff's office?
My son-in-law talked to a sheriff, and he never did call me back.
That's strange. What about a veterinarian?
I talked to my vet, but it was several days down, and he didn't think he could do anything. He didn't come out and look. But I did have a friend or two of mine come out and looked at her at the time.
Well, did the veterinarians tell you that he had dealt with these cases before?
Not my vet. He's a young vet. He has been in practice all that long. I'm sure he heard of it, but he has not done any of these.
Okay. Now, you think that she died a couple of days earlier, so that would have placed it back around Tuesday night, the 17th. Did anyone hear or see anything unusual on that night of Tuesday the 17th?
Yes, there was a loud noise the night that this happened, that we figured it all come in together. It was a different sound. My neighbor heard it, and I've had people as far as 20 miles away tell me they heard that. And 5 miles away, they went out and looked. It's a sound that didn't sound like a helicopter and didn't sound like an airplane. It was a total different sound.
Did you hear it yourself?
I did not. My wife heard it, though.
Your wife did hear it. And what did she try to compare it to?
She woke up long enough and heard an awful noise. And
Joanne Jurgens from a sound sleep.
I heard a low-flying aircraft going over the house. It was loud, slow. It wasn't going real fast. It reminded me of a helicopter.
In what way?
In the noise it produced.
Lots of noise.
Yeah.
Did the house shake in any way?
I don't know. You know, it woke me out of a deep sleep. It scared me. And I was just about, it lasted, maybe a minute. And I was just about ready to get my husband when it went out of range. But it was a lower pitched, it was more of a rumbling sound, like a helicopter blades going around.
Mm-hmm. But did you hear that whoop, whoop, whoop sound?
Not quite like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't an airplane, and it didn't seem like a helicopter. But I don't know what to say it was.
20 miles to the north of Joanne and Larry Jurgens' ranch, Dan Hudson heard the loud noise at his home in Gothenburg. Dan Hudson.
And I stepped outside, and all I could see was a light on the bottom of it, and it was heading in a northwest direction. I saw a light, and I heard a sound of a jet airplane, a large airplane,
mm-hmm.
sounding like they sound when they're coming in for landing at big airports.
And yet all you could see was one small white light.
Yep.
Dan's wife, Karen Hudson, was working at her computer upstairs. Karen Hudson.
And it sounded loud, and I thought to myself, the only thing that I can guess that this might sound like, and this is just a guess, would be, a large aircraft coming really low.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded really close, and it was really loud. And my cat We have a cat that's in the house, and she was just funny. I mean, like on edge and mewing and, you know, acting really strange.
Mm-hmm. Now, how come you didn't get up to go look?
Good question. I don't know. Good question. I can't answer that.
But to you, sitting at the computer, it sounded like the loud roar of a jet coming like low down over your house?
Well, I don't know if I would say a jet because I don't know planes.
Mm-hmm.
But something pretty large and low, yes.
Back in Farnham, at the Dale and Brenda Oberg ranch house, about 8 miles from the Georgians' home, both Brenda and Dale heard the loud sound. Dale Oberg finally was puzzled about how loud and long the sound persisted. Dale Oberg.
We was just watching television in the family room, and, you know, just a real loud roar, like, you know, plane or something, and it just seemed to go on for about 5 minutes, and then we walked to the end of the sidewalk right by our house there, and I seen a little white light going to the northwest there, and it just, you know, it just seemed like the noise stayed so long, and it's just like it, you know, come pretty close to over the top of our house. But.
And could you see the light associated with the sound the whole time that you were hearing?
I didn't get up for quite a little while, and then, you know, after it continued, well, that's when we got up, and we kind of looked at the end of the house, and we got some pretty big trees, so you couldn't see nothing, and then I walked a little further out west, and that's when I seen a little white light. And
in terms of the size of that light and the color, could you compare it to anything I might know?
Well, it was just fairly white, you know, maybe just a little yellowish tint, and it was blinking, I thought.
Off and on?
Yeah.
Not steady, okay. And would you agree that one small white light, even if it were pulsing, is not what you would ordinarily expect to see on civilian or military or commercial airliner or craft?
You know, I don't know for sure. Don't they usually have some red lights on them?
They usually have many lights.
Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting. Your report and Dan Hudson's both are one single small whitish light.
You know, I've never been around, you know, aircraft at airports or nothing, but, you know, I thought maybe it was one of them really big, you know, transport planes or something. You know, is what I guess kind of struck me, that, you know, it just made so much noise. And, you know, usually, you know, something like these military ones that go over and stuff, they go so fast that, you know, they're just here and gone. Mm-hmm. But this, you know, seemed to be real slow.
Did it have a lower rumbling sound?
Well, just, you know, just a lot of noise.
Yeah.
Really a lot of noise.
And it lasted for at least several minutes.
5 minutes, I really do, because I was up in one room there watching television, and when it's just like it was over the top of our house, and it just continued to make a noise. So then we got up and walked out and looked, and even when I could see the white light there, you know, we could still hear it real loud.
The next day, I believe it was your wife, Brenda. She works with the seniors.
Yeah.
And she said that about 8 of them were talking about having heard this loud sound too.
Yeah. See, you know, I suppose several of them would live right in Farnham, and, you know, I think, you know, quite a few people heard it in town there. I'm sure they did. I understand the pasture was that he found the cow. I'm thinking, if you think, you know, Crow, you know, just straight across, that it'd have to be at least 5 miles.
Now, Larry Jurgens again. Have you ever had any other animals mutilated in your 40 years of ranching?
Well, I've had the oddest things happen. I don't say I had anything mutilated.
Like what would be odd things?
This same pasture, pretty near every year something happens in it. And why this pasture, I do not know. 3-4 years ago, I had one of the top bulls I probably ever owned disappear out of this pasture. Disappear. Never found hide nor hair of him. My neighbor to the south of me had one disappear a month before that. Never found hide nor hair, and we rode and we rode and we rode. The bull was mine, was about 8 years old. He never did get out. And and I seen him about 3 days before that, and that was the last I ever seen or heard from him.
There were cases reported in England in the 1970s in which animals either disappeared from fenced pastures or entire herds were found in a neighbor's pasture as if transported in the night. And there have been animals disappear in the United States in and around areas where there have also been animal mutilations. Several dozen disappeared in Montana about 5 years ago during a spike in animal mutilation reports there, and a reported 1,700 cattle allegedly disappeared from Waurika, Oklahoma in the mid-1990s. None of those cases were ever solved. And loud sounds, a sound that reminds me in terms of descriptions of what the people in Farnham were trying to describe, were also described in Colorado back in the 1970s and 80s. But here's one of the strangest. A woman went out on her deck. It was a clear, starry sky. She thought that it was a loud helicopter coming right down to crash into her house. Her dog was afraid and whimpering inside of the bedroom, and as the woman stood there on her deck, hearing this horrible sound right above her, she could see nothing but a starry, clear sky. Again, in an area where they were having animal mutilations. And this week, I traveled out to the Jurgens Ranch with a television crew from the History Channel to work with them on a documentary about animal mutilations that will broadcast sometime in November on the History Channel. And as we walked up to this mutilated cow on Wednesday morning, August 25th, the first thing that struck me was that the animal had been laying there since at least Thursday, August 19th, since that early evening that Larry Jurgens found her. There had been buzzards flying in the sky, and Larry said that there had been maybe some picking away at her rear, but he also said there were coyotes all over the place, and yet the only part of her body where there had been any predation whatsoever was around this very large, rectangular, clean cut that you can see in photographs that he took right after he found this cow. I have them with a report about this Farnham mutilation at my website, www.earthfiles.com. On the headlines page, at the top, there is a hot link to this report about the Farnham, Nebraska mutilation and this loud noise. And there are also photographs that I took during our investigation with the History Channel this week. And those two small holes that Larry Jurgens was talking about was one of the first things that I wanted to see on the chest. And in the original photographs, you will find that there are two indentations, one of which matches exactly a small hole that when we got to the site, I was able to take a pencil and put the pencil lead through one of the holes, but not the pencil itself. I found that the hole was no more than about 1/8 of an inch in diameter with a very clear ridge all the way around it. Think of sort of a ringed ridge. Now, in cases in previous years when I've been able to work with veterinarian pathologists, when we have found that raised edge on excisions or in holes, almost always it has come back from the veterinarian pathology with a pathology report of having been cut with high heat. It's going to take 2 or 3 weeks before we know the answer on this hide. I did excise it. I will be doing some sampling and getting some testing done. But we also went around the animal, and I collected soil, I collected grass, and we did a magnet drag looking for any unusual particles, as we have been doing at mutilation sites and even crop formations for several years. And this soil and grass has now gone to biophysicist W.C. Levengood in Michigan. And what he'll be looking for are the signs that we have found in previous animal mutilations, and that is an impact on the mitochondria inside of the cells. He is able to measure very precisely the respiration inside of those cells, and over again, both at animal mutilation sites and in crop formation sites, he has found a repeated pattern of what you might say was an impact to the respiration ability of those cells. It doesn't mean that we know what is causing the energy to interact with the animals, the grass, the soils, or the crops. We don't even know if it is the same phenomena in crop circles and in cattle mutilations. And the one thing that we can say is that the hard science, the hard physical data, says that there is something with an energy that is being transported to the grass, to the soil, and it may be linked to how these large animals can either be taken up out of pastures and subjected to these excisions, and that's why there's no blood at the site, and lowered back. That's been part of the eyewitness description for decades, but nobody has yet been able to prove precisely the who, the what, and the why. And so, as we talk today and this week at the end of August of 2004, Whitley, it is almost eerie to me to realize that it was September 2nd, 1979, that I placed my very first phone call to the very first rancher in my first investigation of the strange animal mutilation mystery, which more than 2 decades later, I am still trying to understand.
Well, Linda, all I have to say is those coyotes are real clever. I'm telling you, listening to these stories, and it just, really makes my blood boil to think that you actually have officials out there telling that lie and idiots like the New York Times believing it.
Oh, that it's predator or satanic cult.
Anything, as long as it's not something that would scare them.
Right.
The interesting feature about this case is the business about the sound. And I remember one time a very, very odd thing happened at our cabin in upstate New York. We were watching an old movie. I believe it was, in fact, a movie about Vietnam War. And there was a helicopter in the movie. And suddenly the sound of the helicopter seemed to come out of the television and fill the whole living room. Then I realized it was coming from outside. It was somehow synchronized with the movie. We ran out on the front porch and saw immediately above the house a gigantic helicopter covered with lights and thundering away. And it flew off slowly to the north, and we never saw it again. And it reminded me a lot of what that lady was, the sound she was describing.
Right.
We didn't think this helicopter was anything ordinary. It was, first of all, it was enormous, and I mean gigantic. And I really don't know what it was or what we were actually seeing, but what is your sense? Was this cattle mutilation connected with a helicopter, which would suggest that the people who are saying that this must be the military or something doing this could be right?
No. I think that right off the fact that 2 eyewitnesses saw only one small white light that they linked to the sound automatically takes us out of the category of what we at least think of as military, commercial, or civilian airplanes, because none of them fly with just a single small white light. This is why I mentioned that extraordinary story of the woman in Colorado who was, she also was awakened at night by this horrible sound coming over her house. This was back in the 70s. And her dog yelping, scared. And to go out on a deck and not be able to see a single source for all of this noise that sounded like something was coming down on her house is, to me, part of the high strangeness that has always been linked to the animal mutilation phenomenon. When Lou Girotto in the district attorney's office down in Trinidad, he was in charge of doing animal mutilation investigations in the 70s. They had so many. And he said, we had cases and where people said they heard the sound of what they thought might be a helicopter, they could see nothing, or they saw what they thought was a helicopter and it was completely silent and dissolved into a cloud. It's almost as if we have been dealing with a phenomena that can camouflage itself as things that we interpret to be aerial objects, but if we really knew the truth, as in the case of whatever was over your house the huge, gigantic, rumbling helicopter that was over the sheriff's house down in Alabama, but they didn't think that it was really a helicopter for a whole bunch of reasons. And in this case, one small white light associated with gigantic noise heard by at least a dozen people over at least 20 miles. That doesn't compute either.
No, it sure doesn't, does it? Boy, do you sense that something is getting closer, or is it staying the same, Linda? Just overall.
Cycles.
I
think we are dealing with something that cycles and cycles and cycles, and it's almost eerie in the way that the cycles are both geographic and in timelines. And by that, I mean that I can think back in my own notebooks that I was keeping at Channel 7 in Denver in 79 until I left the station in 83. And I myself tried on maps and in this notebook to get a sense of the dates and the names, because there were ranches and farms. Some would have a dozen mutilations in 2 years. Some would have them every 2 years. Some would have them every 4 years as you went back in time, and as you've come up in the future, the same thing. But whatever the oscillation was in time, it has continued to cycle. There was one rancher who told me in Elizabeth, Colorado, that after 4 years of having animals mutilated on the top of one particular pasture hill, that he didn't put any animals on that pasture, and for the first time in 5 years, he did not have a mutilation. Now, why would something that comes from someplace and may be involved with genetic harvesting be so specifically focused on a very particular pasture that it wouldn't mutilate anything that was kept out of that pasture? I don't have an answer, but it goes to this question. If we are now in 2004 in the fall beginning to get a sense that maybe this is going to be a heavier fall again of mutilations, if you go back to 1974, that was one of the peak years, 74, 75, 76, not only in the United States but around the world. And as you lay this out, going back all the way to the 50s, when the very first reports of animal mutilations that I know about occurred, you will find that it is as if something comes and goes and ebbs and flows, pasture to pasture, region to region, state to state, province to province, country to country, and sometimes even hemisphere to hemisphere. When mutilations are occurring like in Argentina or South America, they might not be occurring as intensely in the United States. But it is global, and it has this pulse to it, and where it's headed, that's what I'd like to know.
Well, exactly. And, oddly enough, wherever it's headed, we're going to eventually find out. And, I can't get away from the fact that there are so many genetic similarities between human beings and cattle. And, I just wonder sometimes, maybe somebody's trying to create a new human species.
Or it is a preservation of genetic material for as how many people now, ranging from Jim Peniston out of Bentwater's 1980 case, many abductees, even the very controversial Dan Burish out of the controversial Area 51, has said that we are dealing with a genetic harvest of Earth life on this planet that has been going on for millennia, because there is a time travel issue in the future that has to do with catastrophe and survival. And when I was first working on my first book, An Alien Harvest, after I had done the documentary A Strange Harvest at the CBS station, one of the things that I intuitively kept feeling as time went on, and I had been out in so many fields and had talked with so many ranchers, so many law enforcement, fellow journalists about it, I began to have a sense that whatever was happening, it did have to do with survival, with some kind of a problem, that this was not just supermarket, somebody coming in and taking organs for whatever, that this is a genetic harvest, which is the reason why I called my documentary A Strange Harvest and my first book An Alien Harvest. These military and intelligence people who have not beat around the bush with me have said we're dealing with extraterrestrial biological entities that are intruding around the world in these unusual animal deaths, and they have linked it to a genetic harvest.
Linda Moulton Howe. Next week, do not miss our special Linda Moulton Howe week on Dreamland. Well, an extraordinary man is with us today. Indeed, Ray Fowler, Raymond E. Fowler. He is the author of 10 books and many articles on the paranormal phenomena. Most notably, he has spent many years examining the life and experiences of Betty Andreasson Luca, Betty Andreasson, the Andreasson Affair, truly one of the great documents of the paranormal and the edge in human history. He's got a new book now that's a departure called Synchrophile, Amazing Personal Encounters with Synchronicity and Other Strange Phenomena. And Ray, I want to talk a lot about all of your remarkable life experience, including what's going on with Betty, etc., and so forth. But before we even get into any of that, the preface of your book blew me away. The September 11th stuff went farther than anything I had ever read about those numbers. And why don't we just go through that real quickly together, if you will?
The winning number was 9/11. Now, is this a highly improbable coincidence, or is it debatable? Now, we have these statisticians who would quickly remind us that the probability that 9/11 would be the winning number upon that date is 1 in 1,000. Thus, they would say the probability is not that high. Well, as some would argue, the lottery number is just 1/2 of the equation. This coincidence did not happen on just any date. It coincided with a highly known and emotional event, and it was the date of the greatest attack ever made upon the United States. In addition, it would be pointed out that there were other coincidences regarding the number of 1/1 in its now potential state. September 11th, for example, is written 9-11, 9/11, the telephone number for emergencies. And the sum of the digits in 9/11 are 9 plus 1 plus 1, which equals 11. One might also note that September 11th is the 254th day of the year. And the sum of human beings, not only human beings, but probably all life forms on Earth, are their property. And the UFO abductions, we might equate them with medical exams, maintaining health, breeding, and not particularly for this life, but for another life from where these objects come from. The near-death experience, I think, will be a new birth into another world, and I think that these entities, UFOs, which most people interpret as extraterrestrial, they truly are extraterrestrial, but I think they're paraphysical, that they come from the same place that we go, a parallel universe that coexists with ours. And the only experience that we have on record as far as humans go is the out-of-the-body experience and the near-death experience, where millions of people report leaving their body, going down a dark tunnel into another realm. But this is usually ignored by ufologists. They don't see any connection with this. And yet, Dr. Kenneth Ring, I would call him the father of NDE research, has cases in his files of near-death experiences that are identical to the UFO abduction experience, except the person or persons are taken from their body and experience the same type of thing that UFO abductees experience in the physical body. And vice versa. You take Betty Andreasson, for example. On a number of occasions, Betty and her husband, Bob Luca, were not taken physically as abductees, but they left their bodies behind, and yet they experienced the same type of experience that UFO abductees in their physical bodies. So I think there's a commonality between near-death 2 plus 5 plus 4 equals 11. After September 11th, there are 111 days left in the year. And one might even note that the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center look like the number 11. New York was the 11th state added to the Union, and New York City has 11 letters. And interestingly enough, the flight number of the first plane to hit the towers was, you guessed it, Flight 11. And Flight 11 had 92 people aboard. Now, plus 2 equals 11.
Ray, let me ask you this. What is this all about? What does this mean? That it's so weird. It implies that there's something about the universe that we really are missing here, doesn't it?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. Most people have these remarkable coincidences, but they only happen once in a while. And for some reason or other, my life is just full of these coincidences. And they usually happen in greater numbers when I'm working on a book on paranormal phenomena, UFOs, whatever, or when I'm investigating the subject. And they really started in great earnest when I began the Andreessen affair investigation. It was like I was bumping up against another reality, and maybe through osmosis or something, these experiences began to happen in not only in great numbers, but in great detail.
Why don't you tell us how you happened to meet Betty Andreessen?
Well, Betty wrote a letter to Dr. Hynek. And
Dr. Alan Hynek, the great, really one of the great pioneers of the UFO community, if there ever was one.
Yeah, and he was the chief scientific consultant to several UFO projects. And in the letter, she briefly described an experience where these entities entered the house, and she had communication with them, and really she wanted some help understanding what was going on here. She only remembered a fraction of the experience that later would come out under hypnosis. So Dr. Hynek at that time knew that we were interested in Massachusetts in giving a UFO abduction report, the FBI treatment, as it were. So he sent me the letter. And I put together a team of investigators, and we spent a number of months on the Andreessen affair. We thought that it would just be about one experience that she had in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, but as we continued to dig into the event through hypnosis, we found out that her experiences, as many abductees do, she had an experience that started at age 5 or 6 years old, and we began to trace the experiences that she had from childhood to teenagehood and through her adult life. And it was a fantastic. I think I spent almost 20 years just investigating her family and her family's family, and it would seem that her mother and dad and her husband's mother and dad also had these experiences as well. And again, this is sort of a benchmark of the UFO abduction experience. It seems to be a family situation from one generation to another for some unknown reason, although we can speculate upon those reasons.
Well, yeah. Why don't we speculate a little bit? You were close to this for years and wrote a great deal about it. And what have you come up with?
Well, I've come up with some rather strange ideas.
Good. That's what we're here for.
I think that the UFO abduction phenomena, for example, and the so-called cattle mutilation phenomenon, you could liken UFO abductions to humans maintaining cattle. I think we experiences after-death communication, UFO abductions, out-of-the-body experiences, and even synchronicity and poltergeist phenomena, ESP, all of these things, I believe, come from a common source. And that common source is at least one or many coexisting, I guess you would call them dimensions, that coexist with us, but under normal circumstances we can't detect them. We are limited to linear time. We're limited to the present. If you look at reality, an analogy would be a phonograph record. And the phonograph record's grooves are the past, and the grooves in front of the needle resting on the phonograph needle would be the future. But where that needle touches is all that we experience. But reality as a whole is that whole phonograph record. Now, once in a while, we, or the essence, our soul, whatever you want to call it, might have a precognitive, a human might have a precognitive experience. It might be caused by an impending traumatic experience like death. And our essence is able to go ahead on those grooves, as it were, and come back and report to that person that he or she is going to die, and that person has a premonition of death. Then you have people who, again, somehow bump into this other reality and have an interface with it, who actually can see the past happening as it were happening in the present, or see the future as it were happening in the present. And this would indicate that the past, present, and future are all the same. But we, on this plane of existence, again, are limited to just now, N-O-W, now, the present, and linear time. We cannot experience everything at the same time. The only